Rachel Maddow last night interviewed Bernie Sanders. Sanders kept talking about the young vote growing and coming out. Rachel pointed out to him that actually it had gone down on Super Tuesday from 4 years ago. What can you tell us about those numbers? The youth vote, the myth of the expanded electorate that Bernie Sanders' team has been pushing for some time now.
Yeah, Joe, Sanders' pledge to expand the electorate and bring in young and non-white new supporters looks empty right now. His coalition has shrunk since 2016, not grown. And what we've seen happen is, in fact, the Democratic electorate has gotten less progressive since 2016, not more. You know why? It's because there's a new name for all of those suburban Republicans who don't like Donald Trump. And it's called Democrats. They're voting in the Democratic primaries. Now. And so you have Kasich and Rubio people who have been voting for Pete and Amy and voted in big numbers for Biden in places like Northern Virginia and places where Biden rolled up huge margins on Tuesday.
Well, I mean, I saw Matt Lewis with an I voted sticker for Virginia. And it was really jarring to see Matt, this guy who's been a small government conservative for years, talking about voting in the Democratic primary for the first time in his life. That was remarkable. It's something he would have never imagined doing 5 years ago. But again, that seems to be happening time and time again. You've written an article talking about how Joe Biden may actually be closer to locking down the Democratic nomination than all of us think. Explain why.
Yeah, look, in terms of the drama, this race could be far from over. But in terms of the math, this race is pretty close to over, in my estimation. I hate to be a buzzkill, but when you look at the way that Democrats apportion delegates in an entirely proportional basis, that means that delegate leads can be difficult to build, but they can be even harder to overtake. And keep in mind that Bernie Sanders lost the delegate count substantially on Tuesday, even though a ton of his delegates and votes were attributable to people who cast ballots before South Carolina, before Amy Klobuchar and Pete Buttigieg got out of the race. Now Bloomberg's out of the race. And so he doesn't have that advantage going forward. And if you were to model the future contest results off of the states that just voted on Super Tuesday, the voters who cast ballots after the other moderates got out of the race, Biden would steamroll through Michigan, Missouri. Florida would be something like 70-30. So Sanders needs a seismic shift in this race to have any chance of catching up.
So, Mr. Mayor, you've been listening patiently to this analysis.
Very patiently.
You're a supporter of Senator Sanders. There's no getting around the fact that he had a bad night on Tuesday night. He conceded that even. He conceded that he didn't expand his base, that young voters didn't come out the way he hoped. What does he have to do going forward heading into this next set of elections, which is only 5 days away now?
Yeah, Willie, with all due respect to the previous commentary, a one-on-one race, which I think this is going to be momentarily, is an entirely different animal. By the way, when did Bernie Sanders excel and shock the world in 2016 in a one-on-one matchup? Respect Joe Biden, I really do. But Joe Biden as a candidate previous to the last 100 hours or so has had a lot of challenges in terms of what he stands for, what is his vision, where is he taking us, how does he account for previous votes he's taken, the Iraq War being an obvious example. Now it's going to be a one-on-one matchup where the voters are going to have a very different kind of choice. Bernie Sanders' campaign clearly has shown tremendous capacity to organize. And the other thing that is being missed here, I think, is something's changing on the ground. The Latino vote reality, which was getting a lot of attention in Nevada, is not getting the attention it deserves right now. How did Bernie Sanders go from a guy that really didn't have much of a Latino vote to a guy who now dominates the Latino vote? Because they worked it really hard. They have real work to do. This team I'm a part of, Team Bernie Sanders, we have work to do in these next weeks. But he showed in Nevada, Texas, California, he could go get a much greater share of that Latino vote than anyone ever predicted. Now we got to go do it again. We have to reach deeper into groups of voters in the primary who might have been with other candidates previously. But that measure, that strange kind of 72-hour, 100-hour dynamic that we went through in the last few days, I think that's a thing unto itself.
What happened in those 72 hours, though, Mr. Mayor, and Bernie Sanders needs to explain, I'm interested for your take, is that he got his clock cleaned among African-American voters across the country, through the South, and go, he has to change that dynamic, as you know well.
Yes.
Why do you think he was losing by 40 and 50 points among African-American voters?
Look, it stands to reason if people have a certain amount of information, and I don't blame them for this, I understand it. If
so you're
what
saying they
know,
were low information?
No. I'm saying you had a whole lot of candidates, which I think is a very different discussion. The information that I think people received about Joe Biden was some of his historic connection, which understandably means something to people.
To Barack Obama?
Of course. But the one-on-one race, and I do think this is just pure political science, one-on-one race brings out a whole different set of information, a whole different set of comparisons. Joe Biden's record, I think this is a fair statement, did not get a ton of examination when there's 8 candidates and there's all these I mean, look, if Pete Buttigieg had had a couple of different outcomes, we would be talking about Pete Buttigieg right now, not Joe Biden. So now it's a chance to really examine Joe Biden. His history on Social Security, which I think a lot of black voters and Democratic progressive voters are not going to be comfortable with. His history, of course, on the Iraq War. Now this is the kind of examination we need to go through. By the way, as a Democrat, I want that examination because let me just finish. Donald Trump is going to come at whoever the nominee is like a ton of bricks. I want them put through their paces. I want it to be a tough discussion. Bernie Sanders is going to be able to say to Joe Biden, you're not guaranteeing health care for all Americans, but Americans want health care. He said to a group of donors, with all due respect to him, he said to a group of donors in New York City, nothing will fundamentally change if I am president.
But what you're suggesting,
that's a problem for most Democrats.
All those voters in South Carolina, all those voters across Super Tuesday states who voted for Joe Biden overwhelmingly didn't know enough about him after 50 years in the public square?
Really, I'm going to disagree. Listen, in a one-on-one race, you hear a contrast. You hear people's records compare in a way that you could never do with 6, 8, 10 people on the stage. And bluntly, with all due respect to the media, I don't say this negatively, until about 100 hours ago, you all were projecting that Joe Biden might be about to leave the race.
The Biden campaign was projecting the same until those voters voted for him and changed the race.
No, I'm not saying it negative to you. I'm saying the people heard, here's a guy, he may be around, he may not be around. That is very different from, here's a guy who's going to be the next president. There's 3 people who can be president of the United States now. Donald Trump, Bernie Sanders, Joe Biden. Now the public gets deadly serious in its estimations, and those comparisons really, really matter at this point. If black voters, and I'm someone who has had the blessing of tremendous support in my campaigns in the black community, I ran as a candidate of change because black voters certainly do not like the status quo. If Joe Biden cannot present to black voters a vision of change, and Bernie Sanders can in a one-on-one matchup, we start to have a different discussion.
Mr. Mayor, I mean, Joe wants it, but they've been campaigning for a year and a half. So the idea that these voters in these states haven't heard enough.
In a muddle. Come on, Willie. This has been 10 people, 8 people. It's been a muddle. Every time you have a one-on-one matchup, it is a different discussion.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.